Hello, listeners. I am back this week with Mariska Maas. If you missed it, we have a previous episode with her on cover design. And today we're going to be talking about interior formatting. So, first, I want to say that Mariska is the owner of the bookish design agency Ruber Art, and she is a passionate book designer and illustrator. She has made it her goal to make a Cinderella, one of a kind fit design for each and every book that she works on. No matter if it's for an indie author or a publisher, everyone deserves to have amazing covers, interior formatting, and illustrations. And in her free time, you can often see her doing arts and crafts or reading a book on her never ending TBR. She's got experience both within the publishing industry itself as well as her own developed art skills. And she has worked on over 80 books last year and is booked out for this year. So get on her list, guys. I found her on Instagram and was so impressed with her level of presence on Instagram, her regular posting, her beautiful images of her covers, but also Mariska, I don't know how often you end up doing this for your chapter pages, but you have some gorgeous designs. When you look on the inside of the book and you see the chapter pages, that like half page, which is normally like a blank space where it just has the chapter title or number. I mean, you have all sorts of like just beautiful imagery. Is that typical? Is that a more like fancier design? Where does that fall in the interior formatting world for you?
Truthfully, for me, it is very typical that I do everything custom illustrated. For the general publishing industry, not as much, but luckily it is increasing, especially with the increased amount of special editions, especially in the fantasy and romance genre. So I am trying to push myself a little bit out there to make that change happen, and I'm very much enjoying it.
It's certainly eye-catching. I mean, you can't like not flip through the little images that you have either on Instagram or on your website and just feel like, oh, that looks like a fun book to read simply from the interior, which is wild because usually you think of the cover as being something eye-catching. But if I grabbed one of those books because of the beautiful cover design, which we covered last time, and opened it up and saw those beautiful chapter pages, oh my gosh, like you just know that someone put a little bit more effort and care into that book, which at least in my mind makes it seem a little bit more special.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that aspect. That's also the reason I always used to do it because when I started out, I did the more typical just chapter and then distressive text, and I was like, this is kind of, well, not sad, but I was missing the artistry that you always saw on the covers. And why shouldn't the rest of the book match the outside of it? I mean, people are having to look at it for hours and hours, and why not just give them that little bit of extra or give the author that special little treat of upping their book design by giving them something one of a kind.
I love that. I love that. And I like that you're creating that as sort of a signature thing that you do. And I love and hope, agree that this should be an industry standard. It's beautiful, it's stunning. Now, we're going to be talking about interior formatting today. And I feel like that's probably, at least in most people's minds, the least sexy part about the whole book writing, publishing process. It's something that gets super relegated to the back burner. I know plenty of people that have just taken it upon themselves to format their own self-published books or, really not put a whole lot of thought into it. But for me personally, as a reader, there's nothing more jarring than reading something and suddenly the spacing changes or there's like a whole bunch of like hyphenated words and that's what you're looking for and taking care of as a formatter, right? Like give me a little idea as a non someone who doesn't really know a lot about it yet because I haven't gotten to that point in my own book. What all are you looking at? What are you fixing? What are you tweaking? What goes into that?
There are a lot of things that I pay attention to. I think over the last 3 years that I've been making interior designs, that I've gotten the checklist from 1 to 100 on little things to make sure that the book goes out to print. Because even while you're formatting, little mistakes can slip in. They're really, let's just say, as you said, they are an eyesore. So too many hyphenations. For instance, a chapter ending with two lines on top and having a huge white space underneath. Like for instance, part pages on the left side instead of on the right. Or I know, for instance, like having a double enter where there should not be one, indentation that is not done equally. There are a lot of things that you can pay attention to. I know I have a lot of tip videos on those things as well, but I think also the easiest way to catch one of those is take the free books that you have from bestsellers that you have in your book nearest bookcase and lay them out in front of you and see what do each of them have in common. Like for instance, chapter, where to put it, the indentation, paragraph separators, and make sure that you put them in your book as well, because they are the professionals. And although you do want to self-publish, you can take a page out of their book to make sure that you're up to industry standards.
Very cool. Now, does it really vary a lot based off of genre, or is it just kind of industry-wide trends as far as like what you'll see for formatting?
I think in the fiction classification, the basis for everything is the same. Of course, if you have lecture books or, for instance, dictionaries, those are completely different. We do not have to look at those, but fiction has the same base for everything. That is, you have a chapter page that starts with most of the time a chapter on top. You start the chapter. This can be done with a drop cap or a single line with no indentation, and all the basic paragraphs have an indentation to make sure that the reader immediately knows, okay, this is a new paragraph that's starting. And then you have a paragraph separator for when you have a scene break, so that can either be an icon or three little asterisks. Then you have a line with no indentation, then it just keeps going and going. And the thing most publishers keep in mind is that you don't end a chapter with like two lines on a page, as I mentioned previously, or that you don't have like that every word is hyphenated. Because sometimes, depending on the book, if you read through it, you have like a word hyphenated, next line, word hyphenated, and then too many hyphenations. I make sure to go like through every line. It is a very tedious process, and I'm sorry for all the authors that have to go through it as well, but it does help make the readability for your reader better. Although I can imagine if you've gone read through your book like 300 times already, that you do not want to do this well into your formatting. Um, but it is worth it. But those are definitely things you have to keep in mind.
Well, then I imagine, kind of like you indicated earlier, that there can be issues too with if you fix something here, it might create another problem, three chapters down the road or whatever, or even later in that same chapter. Um, it seems like it could be really an overwhelming thing for a newbie who like really either doesn't know the rules of the industry well because this is their first time writing a book or hasn't done it
Mhm.
themselves. Um, yeah, it just seems like really important visually, but also like a big elephant to chew, right? Like to
It
think about the entire book. What is it that like in what condition do you expect the author to give you their manuscript? Do you expect them to have gone through and done some of this for themselves? I mean, because at some way you have to
Mhm.
know, like, oh, this is actually supposed to be a scene break within this chapter. Like, you're not deciphering that as you read.
Mhm.
What's the expectation of where the author gets it to before they hand it over to you?
I fully expect an author to not deliver their product perfectly because truthfully that is not fully their job and it can be very hard to do so. So I always make sure to send my authors a guide that says like, oh, do's and don'ts for when you submit your manuscript to your formatter, which is a file I've made over the last 3 years from things that I've gotten from authors and was like, oh, this is actually not that handy, but I couldn't blame them for it because I never told them it wasn't. So I have like a little list of like seven do's and seven don'ts, and following that list helps me a ton. So I tell people, hey, if you want any text messages or letters or anything, like put it in your Word document, make a little comment, tell me, hey, Mariska, I want this to be added, or I want, for instance, a scene break to be here, and then I make sure they specify it with asterisks and not just enters. I make sure they remove older tabs because truthfully, tabs can be quite tricky when I work personally from InDesign, but even if not, they can just pop up and they have like this big of a space which you don't notice. So always do search, find, delete your tabs. And also, just to make sure that like italics or anything special, just to label it and to remove all the double enters and maybe do double spacing. Because truthfully, if you write a full manuscript, I bet in the books that you've already published, there are multiple double spaces if you have not deleted them. So make sure to check for
Mm,
those as well. And after they follow like the tidy guide, I have a manuscript that is fully ready to go, and I think it took them 3 hours to go through it max to fix everything. And I will be sure to have a manuscript for interior formatting, of which very little chance of mistakes is. Because if you do the prepping well, especially in your Word document, the chance of errors is like way more minimized, and you have less trouble having to go through the interior formatting later on to check for mistakes.
that's great. Yeah. And you do put up videos all the time about, especially about the interior formatting and the tips and the tricks for people to use. What are like major pitfalls or doomsday scenarios?
I think let's start with the doomsday scenario. I know that the biggest doomsday scenario for every author is if you publish your book and there's a mistake. Truthfully, I've
Yeah.
worked with publishing houses and with other people, and mistakes are always gonna happen. I know a book that we've had two editors on, it went for drafts, and even as an interior formatter, I would still pick things out. For instance, like little spelling mistake, and then we published it, and 2 or 3 weeks later, you get an email from a reader being like, "Hey, you know that book that you published? Well, I spotted like three more like mistakes on page this and this and this." Doomsday scenario for every one of you, but truthfully, it is very common in the industry, and that's why we have reprints 2, 3, 4, etc. Products of being self-published, depending if, of course, you buy it in stock, but normally for Ingram and KDP, you can immediately text your typographer or interior formatter or do it yourself and just upload a new copy. With ebooks, even easier, and the mistake is easily fixed. So even though that might be a doomsday scenario, no stress, can be fixed, and everybody, sadly enough, still happens to it, including me sometimes. That's always why I have to double check with the offers. And I think like pitfalls that I sometimes see is just depending on the basic layout, and that's that they don't match with industry standard. There are like bigger spaces, or they don't want to use hyphenation, and suddenly you have this big of a gap where there should be like a way smaller one. Or truthfully, I could keep talking about pitfalls for hours. Won't do that, but biggest easiest thing if you have done your own interior, just have someone read over it before you send it out, because your eyes have been looking at it for so long that you need a second opinion. That is the easiest way to like prevent pitfalls as well.
Well, and you had mentioned, the KDP before. I know that they will give you, like, once you put it on there and before you have it Amazon set to sell it, you can get like an author's copy. So you can see it like in print and see exactly. So you're not necessarily looking at the computer screen anymore. You're now holding it in your hands and you're able to actually see it as your reader's going to see it. And I think even seeing it in
Mhm.
that format could help your eye catch things that maybe it wouldn't notice on a screen so easily.
Absolutely would recommend everyone to get a printed proof copy, because I know, for instance, once that I knew an author who had sent in the files for publishing, and suddenly the italics of the R had become little dots because somehow the font had not been in that embedded. So the PDF looked amazing, but somehow when printing, the italic R's had disappeared. Easily fixed, but without getting a proof copy yourself, you wouldn't have noticed. As well as, for instance, with margins, like the little white space on the outside and on the inside. On your computer, it might look fine, but unless you have a printed copy and you're able to open the book, especially with these really thick ones, you won't know if you have enough space, or, for instance, your text is disappearing into the spine. As well as, for instance, the
Mm.
adding of images. Images are really amazing. Definitely recommend adding maps or character art or anything in your book, but you also have to make sure that the print quality is up to par. Like text, most of the time prints completely fine, but with images you have to check if they're good enough quality, if they print well, and a proof copy is always also definitely recommended for that. Plus, they're really pretty to have on your shelf, and it's like a limited edition for just you, so also nice in that aspect.
I love that. Now, what, especially those who try to DIY this step, what do they need to be mindful of in regards to licensing and fonts?
Yeah, licensing sounds way more intimidating than it is. I know it's a very legal term, but licensing, the basics comes down to it is that you're allowed to use a font or an image for a certain purpose. Most of the time, if you're publishing, which you are commercially doing because you're trying to make money of it, you need a commercial license. For images, you can easily get it from like photo stock images or pixels or another website, and you can buy a license for an image starting from €1 to free, depending on where you purchase it. And the same goes for fonts. There are a lot of options for free fonts. There are some fonts that you could just buy for once for like $30 and you could use it forever. Or you can, for instance, buy it as a license. Like I know I personally use Adobe. I pay a monthly subscription fee and I can use all the fonts in our database for ebooks, for print, and that's a really good option. But personally, if you're just doing one book a year, Adobe's not recommending it because it's too pricey for a month. For me personally, as a designer, absolutely great. Otherwise, a bit out of your budget, most likely. And I would just recommend Google Fonts. It's completely free. I know Creativa Fabrica has multiple freebie fonts. Um, so if you want great fonts on a budget, just make sure that you Google commercially free fonts. And I know there are a lot of fancy fonts that are just absolutely gorgeous out there.
Oh, fun. Right, too, and that's the other thing, like you just mentioned fantasy fonts, making sure that the fonts too are appropriate for your genre and being aware of that too, which you are as someone who does this professionally, but maybe someone who, is writing in a certain genre but just happens to like a more curly Q font that might not be appropriate for the genre that you're writing in. So keep that in mind as well, listener. Um, well, amazing. Thank you for talking to us about interior formatting. Mariska is offering a 5% discount as a promotion for any one of our listeners if you fill out her form within the next 3 months. So, any of her services, whether that's cover design or interior formatting or illustrating that you're looking to do, if you use the code IWC5 within the next 3 months, you can get 5% off. Um, what is the current wait time and how long does it take you to do the interior formatting for, say, like I don't know, 100,000 word book?
So currently, my wait time is starting to reach out into 2025. So I'm fully booked for 2024. Very privileged to be able to say that because I'm allowed to work with very many amazing indie offers. But if your book is coming out in 2025, I can usually have it done within a 3 week time slot. So you can send me an email or a request, and then we can see what time frame works for you, when your deadline is, and when I will be able to fit a person in.
Amazing. Now, for those who are um, self-publishing and maybe haven't finished their manuscript yet and they want to get on your calendar for the cover design, for the interior formatting, that sort of creates a little bit of like self-imposed deadline for them, right? So it's like you got to have your at least your manuscript finished by this point so I can do your interior formatting in this block of time, right? Or is there a little bit of wiggle room, or how does that work?
I would prefer no wiggle room, truthfully, because as I said, I tend to book out 6 months in advance. But in case that it is needed, I might be able to discuss something if I have the availability. Preferably keep to the deadline that you have, and otherwise let me know in advance, and then we can see what we can arrange.
Right. Very cool. Well, thank you once again for joining us. Listener, we hope you've enjoyed this two-part series. You can follow Mariska on her social media. She's on Instagram and TikTok with weekly tip videos. She also has an email list. Visit her website. You can see wonderful testimonials and examples of both the cover designs and those engaging chapter pages that I mentioned on that interior formatting. Thank you again, Mariska, for being here for these 2 episodes. And hopefully we get some beautiful interior formatted books out there and we can continue to enjoy our reading experience, right?
Yes, absolutely agree. Thank you for having me.
Right.